My name is David Fox. Welcome to another episode of the Business of Higher Ed podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to be welcoming Dayana Kibilds to our podcast. She is a brand and marketing strategist specializing in enrollment. She is currently the vice president of Ologie, which collaborates with colleges and universities, defining their uniqueness and attracting best fit students. She's the vice president strategy there. She is the author of a best-selling book recently published called Mailed It. And I would say an expert in communication, digital communication in particular, has worked with Western University, Cornell University, Penn State University in the United States. And so we're just thrilled to welcome you, Dayana, to the podcast today.
Thank you so much. I am very excited to be here and talk about education and how it relates to branding.
Right. So Canada, as elsewhere, choppy waters. Choppy waters, to say the least. We've had sweeping immigration reform. We don't need to go into a lot of details about that, but what the result is for many Canadian universities and in other countries too, but we're going to focus on Canada. Canadian universities and colleges is that enrollment is a huge focus. Recruitment of domestic students, and how we've focused a lot on international students, how re-examining our practices in terms of recruiting and marketing to and strategy with respect to domestic students, digital marketing, brand management, brand strategy. These are all right at the top of every school's to-do list and focus list. Based on your experience, based on your work in this field, can you kind of set the table for us? What are we seeing at Canadian universities and colleges with respect to marketing, branding, strategy?
Yeah. So I want to start this with, I think, my own personal story. My first few days in a Canadian university in charge of domestic recruitment. So as you mentioned, I worked at Western University, and I came to Western from having worked in the United States for 6 years. And I remember my first few weeks, right? I was learning from the previous manager of recruitment. How do we do it? How do we do this job? How do we recruit domestic students to Western University? A very well known, very big, very well established research institution in Ontario. And my biggest shock was realizing that there was very little, if I could even call it that, marketing or communication with prospective students. A lot of the activities that the office undertook were physical activities. We go to high schools, we go to the OUF, we go to, we go to fairs, and we go to fairs with other schools. And Ontario is really proud because we have a co-opetition here, right? A lot of the Ontario schools recruit together, and we do it together, and we all want the best for the students and for every school, right? And I'm sitting there coming from an American digital marketing background,
Right.
and thinking, we don't communicate with our students through email. We don't have a social media channel. What are we doing? Right. And they're like, oh, no, we do communicate with students through email. And they gave me the email plan, and it was 10 emails throughout the course of a year that, were just kind of static flyer type communications. And I had come from having implemented entire CRMs with email communication flows that, react to student behavior. So pretty quickly, I realized that it wouldn't take that much to really move the needle in how we were communicating with students if we were to move into a more digital first mindset, which is where our students were, right?
Yes.
At the time. So my first impression of the state of the land in Canada was okay, this is kind of old school. That was the feeling, and
Yeah.
it wasn't just Western because I worked there. It was the same stuff was happening with our peers across Ontario because I knew that we worked together. There were some schools, of course, schools like U of T that have more resources, that they were a little bit farther ahead. But when it came to the basics of even just the data we are getting from the OUAC or the data that we get from OUF, there wasn't that, I think, hunger or even interest in getting as much detail as we could about our prospective students so that we could tailor and customize our communications to them. Now, this was at this point 7 years ago. Um, and we all know what happened, right? In 2020. And so 2020, I think, gave all Ontario colleges and universities the permission to try new things that we were not trying before because we didn't really have to, right? Because the system was
Right.
working, because schools were not struggling, because we had plenty of international students and things were working, right? Now, when you think about how many 20 plus colleges and or universities at least are in Ontario, that's scary, right? It's a limited number of students for a lot of institutions in just one province, and that's not even counting the colleges and the alternatives that students have.
Yeah.
So the idea of co-opetition always seemed really interesting to me because when you went and you asked like your peers at other schools, so how do you do this and how do you do that? They wouldn't actually say.
Right.
So are we cooperating or are we competing? Because we're competing. Um, Anyways, so the pandemic, I think, for me for sure, but I know for my peers across Ontario as well, it really just unleashed us as marketers onto the Canadian domestic recruitment market. I know for a fact, my team and I, we really made we got a CRM. We made really robust email communication journeys. We opened up a social channel. We worked with our central communication offices to really work on that social content. We redid our website, which used to just be these hubs of almost static information to be something more dynamic, tailored to the student journey. We revamped everything. We implemented SMS texting, and so we saw that first year where we all thought things were going to be terrible because of COVID-19. We saw skyrocketing enrollment, and that continued. That has continued because not just for us, we were now using the channels that our students were in, um, the way that they do research, the way that they consume content, the way that they interact with each other was online. And universities were just behind, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I really feel like I had a bit of an unfair advantage coming in because all I had to do was what I was doing in the US. Like I wasn't really innovating, I was just bringing it here. And then COVID unleashed it. Like it gave us so much permission to just try things, do online webinars, do virtual tours. And now that seems kind of common, right? Like this is what all schools are doing, but it was not the case in 2017, 2018, 2019. So that to me was the state, like that's where this comes from. It's like my own personal kind of reflection on it. Now, what has happened since is we all know, right? There's decreasing enrollment because there's decreasing population of traditional age students. The international student pressure and like losing tuition dollars from the reduction of those numbers, and then schools really struggling financially across Ontario. Now we're all looking at each other like, oh, now we are competing, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a limited pool of students and we don't want to be the next university that closes, right? We don't want a drop in enrollment. So what I have noticed since, and I have had the privilege of meeting some really clever folks at institutions across Ontario for my podcast, actually Talking Tactics, is an increased focus on personalization.
Mm-hmm.
So we have recruitment teams working more closely with central marketing teams, working more closely with admissions and the registrar, financial aid, in order to really think about the comprehensive student journey from the moment they start thinking about college or university to the moment that they become students and beyond. And instead of just like the one size fits all, we're blasting information out there, doing an open house and hoping for the best that used to be the case. I'm really seeing some really interesting, hyper-focused, hyper-specific content created for students in different parts of their journey. So we've leveled up is my perception of the current lay of the land, and we've leveled up because we're starting to see the market pressures
Right.
competing for the same pool of students. Yeah.
Right. Right. Okay. With crises does come
Hmm.
often opportunity and growth.
Hmm.
With
Hmm.
pain, sometimes
Hmm.
comes growth. What are the different pieces, the key elements that we
Hmm.
need to be thinking about as institutions? We have institutions that are primarily undergraduate, the larger universities, the research universities. What are
Hmm.
the key elements that our schools, colleges need to be thinking about in terms of brand, in terms of strategy, in terms of marketing?
Yeah. So because of the competition, I really think branding has become a lot more important, right? Because if we were to look at what colleges and universities offer at face value, right? You're studying in a classroom, you're making friends, you're going to get a degree, you might have a few experiences. If you were to strip communications from brand names and locations, like you would see, oh, this is the same product. Like this is exactly the same product with very minimal variations, right? So I always like to think of when folks are trying to understand brand, I like to take people out of our category because it's really hard to understand a university brand, and think about shoes or think about like, I don't even know, like your favorite toilet paper, like a product that is exactly the same except for its brand, right? We're not when Nike is selling a shoe to us, they're not necessarily saying we have the very best material in our shoelace.
Yeah.
We have, the cushioning of our soles is elite, world class. They're not doing that, right? They're selling a feeling. They're selling this idea that I can do it. I can put on these shoes and start running even if I've never run before. If I'm looking at an Adidas shoe, right, then it's more about I want to look good putting on these shoes. Like I'm going to feel fashionable putting on these shoes, right? So they're not selling the shoe. They're selling an experience. They're selling a feeling, right? And what I find with universities and colleges that don't have a brand is that they talk about their attributes, right? We have this number of classes, we have this number of majors, we have this exceptional student experience, we have our top 10 for this, we're top 25 for that, we have 160 student clubs. Okay, so does literally every other college or university that I'm interested in, right? So what is it about you that makes you special? And if you ask, right, and if you ask a lot of professionals in the space, they'll be like, it's our community. I'm like, okay, every single one of us is saying it's
Yeah.
our
Yes,
community.
community. Yeah.
For all of us, it's our community. Like, what is it about our
Part of a
community, right?
family. It's
Like,
family.
really, yes. Yeah, so are every other school because no one's going to say, actually, we hate you here.
Yeah, no.
And like that never happens, right? We
No,
have a
no,
really ugly campus and we are going to hate you. Nobody does that, right?
no.
So one of the things like the very first thing to look at is if somebody asks you about your school or your college or university, and your response is a list of attributes or accolades, you don't have a brand. Like that's my hot take on this.
Can I interrupt just right
Yeah.
there? So, without naming names, in Canada,
Yeah.
are there schools that do not, in your opinion, without naming names,
I won't name
have
names.
have brands?
There are a few schools that have brands in Canada.
So there's relatively more schools that do not have brands,
In my opinion,
in your
yes.
opinion. Okay. All
And
right.
I think that's the misconception is that folks think of a brand as a visual style guide. The color, the logo, the font, that's a style guide, okay? And that's important. It is super important for a brand. But what that's missing is the story, right? It's the why, the feeling, the what do you stand for, and what do you want people to remember about you outside of how many great majors you have, right? So
And this
that's a
ties
brand.
in, and this ties into a research report that Ologie just, I believe, released
Hmm.
relatively recently,
Hmm.
where I was noticing when you're saying, well, we're a community. We have this many, we have this. And it was
Yeah.
part of an infographic in that report, right? Of
Hmm.
things that students, based on your research, they don't want to hear. It doesn't
No,
impact them because,
no.
yeah, everyone has this club, that club, whatever, whatever.
Yes.
Okay. So then let's take some schools have a brand. If I am a school and I am looking, so what are the steps we're going to go through very basically?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a very conceptual and creative process, I will say. And this is my day job. I love branding because it's like a playground, really. So the very first thing that you need to do when you're trying to uncover your brand is really understand who you are as an institution. You understand this through conversations with different constituents on campus. You know, asking students like, what are some of the things about being on campus that you love? What are some of the things like, who is your favorite professor and why? How did you feel the first time you came to campus? Like, we start to capture these moments and emotions about who we are as an institution. It's not who we think we are, which is why we have to do this research, right? Um, you can do it qualitatively, quantitatively. I'm not going to get into methods, but it's the first step is who are we? Who are we? And a little bit of a stretch of who do we want to be, right? And that happens often through strategic vision, strategic planning processes as well. You uncover who you are and who you want to be. But sometimes aspirational brands are tricky because if it's too far from the truth, it's disingenuous, and then your current student body and your alumni body will, tear it apart. So it really has to be like very first step is who are we? What do we stand for as an institution? Now, I'll give some examples of some known brands. I think in like even U of T, I think is a good example that can be named. When I think of U of T, I think research. I think innovation, right? I think research primarily. Like they're discovering, they're creating, they're doing. And I don't necessarily think specifically of any major or the campus or a specific field or anything. I'm thinking science. I'm thinking, and maybe that's not what they want their brand to be, but that's how I know them, right? When you think about, as I said before, when you think out of category, what do you think of when you think of Nike? Human empowerment. What do you think of when you think of, um, I don't know, anything that you like? That's who you are. The other component, the next component of that is who you are isn't enough because who you are may not be competitive and who you are may not be interesting to your market. So the other component is finding the white space in the market because the reality is an institution could be many things. You choose what you are going to emphasize, right? So just because I think U of T is a research institution, like leaning into research and like really leading Canada and the world in many fields, that doesn't mean they don't have a great community. That doesn't mean that they don't have a great arts program, right? Your brand is what you choose to lean into. It's not the totality of who you are. And that choice of what you lean into comes from looking at the market. So, what from my competitive set? So, where do most of my students go? Like students that apply to both but don't choose me, where do they go? Or maybe it's vicinity, however, you decide to choose what your competitor set is. What is different about you to them? Like how would you position yourself differently to them, right? So you think even about the schools in Toronto, TMU and U of T and some of the ones nearby, they're very different positioning, right? And so you don't want to go against the big dog. You don't want to fight Coca-Cola with your brand. You want to find the white space. You want to find the space for you. So it has to be true to you. It has to be different than the peers around you. And then your market has to care, right? Your prospective student market, it has to be interesting to them. So there is a lot of kind of, from a brand perspective, a little bit of reliance on market sentiment, the type of education programs that are popular during a certain generation. And so it doesn't mean that everybody has to be STEM, for example, if STEM is having a moment right now, but it does mean that you have to think about, all right, if this is who we are and this is what we want to highlight based on our competitive set, where's our market? Like, who cares about this stuff? Who would want to be here? And I think that third piece is extremely important, especially in the Canadian market, where at least in my experience, and I haven't worked at an actual like at an institution for the past 3 years, but uh, you're kind of trying to be everything for everyone. Uh,
Yeah.
but you're
Yeah.
not, like, you're not, right? So you yourself, you went to a small school in New England. That's a small liberal arts college. It's a very different experience than a Big Ten football school.
Actually, yeah, it was a business school. And just as we're talking about branding,
Yeah.
they would say they had very, very little, few liberal arts. They said, we train business leaders.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
That's what we do. You want to be a doctor? Don't come here.
Don't come here. Exactly. And
We,
that's so
we,
important. Yes.
you want to be a finance, you want to be accountant.
Yeah.
You know, we
Yeah.
do that well.
Yeah, exactly. And like that is so important. And I think that's one of the things that many universities are and colleges are failing at right now, because most of them want to say, oh no, if like whatever you want to be, you can do it here. Like if you want
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
if you know, so even schools that are known for science, I have a client right now, I won't name them. It's a US based client, very famous science school in the world. They're desperate to attract students who are not interested in science because they have great non-science programs.
That's
And
interesting.
that's great. Do that, sure. If you can fund that, do that. However,
Yeah.
still, the students that are going to go study an arts program at a science school are students who like both, not just art. You know? And that's okay. Lean, I think this is one of the biggest challenges for our industry, not just in Canada, it's higher education in general. Lean into who you are.
Yeah.
Just like your example for your undergrad, if it's a business school, if it's a STEM school, if just lean into it for branding purposes. It doesn't mean that you don't have that offer and that it isn't great. But in terms of your brand and what you are known for, it is okay to lean into your strengths because that is going to attract the right type of people to your school. And by right, I mean best fit, the ones that are going to
That's it.
thrive there, the
And
ones that are
stay.
going to, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's rough. It's rough for universities to realize we're not for that type of student, right? We're just not. And I see it. I still kind of look at very connected to Western. My husband's still professor there. I see in kind of the Western Reddit subreddits and people talking about Western, students who struggle to make friends. This isn't just Western; it happens everywhere, because it's definitely a school that is set up for a student who is in at least some capacity extroverted, right?
Yes. Yes.
You have to go after it at a big school. It's not just
Yeah.
Western. It's in a big
Yeah. No,
school,
no, no. No, I went
right?
to Western and
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
And so when they try to when you as an institution don't acknowledge who you are for and what type of student would be attracted to that, to who you are, then you're setting up some of these students to have a rough time,
Yeah.
And so I think it's a tough call to make, and it's a tough branding decision to make. But ultimately, we want the students that are going to thrive and succeed on our campuses. So those are the three pieces. It's who you are, how are you different, and like who in the market would want this. That's how we choose a brand.
Okay. So, and part of the challenge in terms of the shift, right,
Hmm.
is, for example, community colleges in Canada, junior colleges, I guess we would call them in the United States, community colleges set up in the 60s, 70s in Ontario, very much with the view of getting as much education, learning to as many
Hmm.
people as
Hmm.
possible. I mean, that was kind of
Hmm.
the mission, similar to some of, I think they call them land grant
Yes.
universities
Yeah.
in places like Tennessee or West Virginia, getting some education. But the other thing that is happening, obviously, is these, what I would call community colleges in Ontario now are polytech, vertically integrating the
Hmm.
market. So now my nephew is going to get a business degree from what was a community college when I
Hmm.
was going through. So I think we also got to figure it. I think you're right in the sense that even if we have thought about this before, we've got to think about it in a different way right now because things have
Hmm.
changed. I have a soft spot in my heart, based on my history, for smaller,
Hmm.
mid-sized, particularly undergrad focused strength in
Yeah.
undergrad, schools in these smaller communities where
Hmm.
the community is the school and the school is the
Hmm.
community, but a lot are struggling, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not just about recruiting students, and it's not just about immigration reform. It's also about
Yeah.
going to someplace other than, let's say, Toronto or Surrey,
Yeah.
which I think
Yeah.
actually can be something that you really, really celebrate. But
Yeah.
what's a productive way for them to be thinking about branding
Hmm.
and marketing? They're not in Toronto. They don't have everything, which I think is an advantage actually.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
they don't necessarily have the same resources.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great point. Brand is expensive. I think I think for those types of schools, like they're definitely going through a bad reputation moment that is really unfair, right? I think one of the things that the smaller schools really need to learn is to articulate their value better. And part of that is there seems to be, when I think about it, there seems to be a lot of comparing the bigger schools, right, to establish their value. So here you'll have more focus, here you'll have more attention from faculty, here you'll, et cetera. Or maybe they don't see that and they need to say that. I think it's for them, it's even more important to decide who they are for and to really go after those students. And less than branding, maybe it's more marketing because you are not going to be found if you are not one of the big players and you are not known. So that's another thing that I thought was really interesting, at least in the position I was in at one of the big schools, that we really just like waited for students to kind of come to us
Yeah,
almost, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
We did the thing, we went to the fairs and we did the things everybody else did, but there wasn't any proactive, targeted outreach to the pockets of populations where we know our students are or could be. And I think that would be the productive use for those schools is really, really understand their student body and the types of students that enjoy it there and thrive there and want that to learn in that model and go after them. Establish partnerships with schools, establish pipelines, establish transfer credit programs. So it's less about building a brand necessarily. Although I still think a brand is important because the brand is what helps someone choose you versus another very similar place. But it's more about like if I had to prioritize, it would be marketing spend, targeting the students that you want and making yourself known and really articulating your value to those students because you're just not known, so you're not going to be found.
What do we do really, really well, as you've said? What like,
Yeah.
but here's where I kind of I think Canadian schools may have problems. What are we really good at? We That means that we have to admit that there are some things that we are just not
Oh yeah.
good at,
That's right. That's right.
right?
Yeah.
So what are we really, really good at? And what could we be really, really good at if we spent or we did this
Yeah.
much over here? Now,
Yeah. Yeah.
that means admitting that we
Good
can't,
at everything.
we just can't do it. We can't do it.
Yeah. So that's important, and that's important for financial sustainability,
Right.
even. But I would take that even a step further, which is from a branding point of view, even if you are good at 10 million things, you still have to pick one story to lead with. And
Okay.
that's not one thing to lead with. It's why do you exist? What do you bring to the world, right? And you might do it through different ways. But
Yeah.
if you don't pick that anchor, that anchoring thought, that anchoring idea, then nobody's going to understand why they should choose you versus another
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
And that's I think a lot of people struggle with the distinction between branding and marketing, right? So branding is that it's that entity, it's that identity. But marketing, it doesn't mean let's stick with this the science school example, right? If you're a elite science school and you also have great social sciences and great liberal arts programs and a great business school, It doesn't mean that you will not put marketing dollars to recruit students in those areas and go after them, right? It just means that when you put your story out there, you're not trying to say, we're all of these things at once, because then you're nothing, right? Like we all know that phenomenon. So it's admitting what you don't want to be, it's admitting what you don't want to invest in, but it's also choosing what your very best, like what you said, the very best thing, that what do you do better than anyone else, and really leaning into that for how you want to be known.
Mhm.
And people are terrified of that. People are terrified of that because then they think that students who are interested in different things won't choose to go there, but that's okay.
But
Then
yeah,
yeah,
that's the thing.
that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
And so it's counterintuitive, and I understand with enrollment pressures why we don't want to do that. But what happens is that then you just look like everybody else.
Yeah.
And it's a, coin toss at the end of the day, or it turns into a financial aid game, especially in the US, or as things become more competitive.
Discounting, yeah.
And so, what you need to do is start building that affinity, and you can only do that if you have a really strong identity. So I I think it's time. I think as things get more competitive, and as we as an industry battle the reputation, like we're taking a lot of reputation hits lately, with the students not being able to find jobs, or I think we all really need to think about what it is that we do and why we do it, and put that out there in a way that's less we do everything for everyone that just feels like a commodity.
Right.
So it's our time. I think this is our moment.
Great. That's great. All right. I ask everyone, I don't want to take up too much of your time here. I ask everyone at the end if we're going to make this about, again, my small to mid-sized college, uh, comes to you and says, or I can pay for 3 pieces of
Hmm.
advice
Hmm.
about, like, we're students, how are we getting enroll students, where are we finding them,
Yeah.
what are we about, uh, what are we doing, what would those 2 or 3 things be?
Yeah. So the first thing I think is finding that anchor. So what are you about? Like really understanding who you are as an institution. And I would challenge you to go way deeper than we're family, or we're community, or we're the best at. If that is the first thing that comes out of your mouth, keep asking yourself why, but why, but why. And you'll get to, well, because we believe in the city, or because we just really believe in the growth of potential of student, like you're going to get to something that's a little bit more meaningful than your attributes. So that's first. And then once you have that, any messaging that you create, any communications, whether it's in person or written or sent or billboard or printed, find a way to anchor it back to that idea, right? So that any touch point, any experience of you that somebody might experience over their college search or their lifetime has that vibe, so that they'll remember you that way. So that's from a branding perspective. From a marketing perspective, the third piece of advice would really be, uh, stop the one to many approach and invest your money a lot more strategically, seeking the students that you know are going to be successful at your institution. And that means investing in audience research, understanding your segments, and really tailoring communications to them. We are entering an era that makes it easier with the technology that we have available to us right now. So if, I bet, I'm not on a campus right now, but I bet Canadian institutions are really struggling with the use of AI and how they're going to use AI and allowing the use of AI from a marketing segmentation point of view.
You would win that bet.
Yeah. It can only help you, right? And so obviously privacy concerns and all of that, be careful with that. But personalization is really important in this super competitive landscape. But even that personalization won't take you super far if you don't leave a memory in that person's mind, and that memory comes from your brand. So it's find out who you are, know how to articulate it at every step, and then go after the students that would thrive. at your institution.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much, Dayana.
Of course.
This is really, obviously it's timely. It's such an important thing for our system. A few episodes ago, I talked to a former VP or president who said we were at he had a very neat phrase, a precarious point
Mm-hmm.
of inflection, where really the Canadian post-secondary education system is really being challenged on many, many fronts.
Mm-hmm.
And choices have to be made. And
Yes.
people don't want to necessarily make the choices
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate your taking the time to speak with us, to share your expertise. Dayana's biography and picture, as well as a link to her book, and Ologie, the link to the company, which she's a
Mm-hmm.
VP, will be in the comments below. If you have any questions, or you like this type of programming, let us know, and let us know any type of topics you'd love to see covered. So with that, thank you very much, Dayana, and to our audience, have a wonderful day. Thank you.